Hello students, the module on power sharing, that is class 10th, democratic politics. So in this chapter, we are going to discuss various aspects of power sharing. And before we proceed, I just want to brief you two objectives of studying this chapter. The number one is that you are going to be familiarized with importance of power sharing in a democracy. Why should we have power sharing? What happens if you don't go for power sharing? So these aspects you are going to understand when you complete this module, power sharing, class 10th, democratic politics. Second objective of studying this chapter is to know and to understand how power is shared and how do they work, especially power sharing between legislature, executive, judiciary, what is called the spatial power sharing, or between uh, central government, state government, or the local self-government. So these type of spatial working of power sharing can be discussed. That is also we are going to understand. And another aspect is that how the power is shared between various social groups and various communities. So when you complete this chapter, this module, we are going to achieve these two objectives. So knowing importance of power sharing is not an easy task. And to know the prominence of power sharing, how power sharing helps in a democracy, what is the relevance of power sharing, I just prove all these answer to these questions with two cases. Two cases I'll take. So let me take number one case. The number one case I'm taking from Belgium, an European country. You can see in the left side where is it located, and of course in the right side you have the larger scale map of Belgium. When you talk about Belgium, a country which is inhabited by people who speak different languages or various ethnic groups. So, what is this ethnic composition of Belgium? Is very interesting one to know. Okay, we have 1% German speaking. You can see on the right side, 1% German speaking. We have, and the majority in Belgium people, of course, they speak Dutch. So Dutch speaking 59, so a Dutch community you can call them as. Then we have French speaking 40%, of course, South Belgium. And one of the specialities here in Brussels, the capital city of Belgium, the French speaking people are majority. All over the country, French speaking people only 40%, but in Brussels, we have French speaking people 80%, and the Dutch, who is actually majority in the country level, are minority in capital city Brussels. So with this ethnic background now why am I talking about this ethnic composition? Just to prove what is the relevance of power sharing. So with this type of ethnic composition, then question arises in our mind, was there any conflict in Belgium? So by knowing all this ethnic composition, the question arises in our mind, was there any conflict in Belgium? Or did they go for power sharing? The answer is yes, there was a sort of conflict in Belgium. The reason was the 40% French speaking community was actually rich and powerful. That was not liked by the majority Dutch. And especially in a capital city called Brussels, as I said, where the Dutch people were minority or are minority, 20%, whereas 80% French speaking. So these type of misunderstandings, financially, educationally backwardness of the majority community led to conflict in this country. But how did they settle that conflict? That is very interesting one. That is where we are stressing the importance of power sharing in a democracy. In spite of having conflict, the people in Belgium have settled it. They settled it only through going through what is called the power sharing. They amended constitution in such a way that they had decided to go for power sharing, where all the communities live happily and peacefully. So to avoid conflict, what did Belgium do? It's very interesting to know various power sharing mechanism which Belgium adopted. Number one, especially to Belgium, is that equal number of ministers in the central government, what you call the top level government, will have equal number of ministers. There is a provision for prime minister in the constitution, and seven Dutch or seven French. So altogether we will have 15 members team of cabinet, under the leadership of Prime Minister. That's what central government. We don't have such power sharing mechanism in any parts of the world. And it is special to Belgium, equal number of ministers in the central government. And that's how they avoided conflict. And second important power sharing mechanism which Belgian people adopted is that they have state governments. There are basically three regions like French or Dutch and even the capital city. So the state governments have power. Central governments have given power to the state governments. And state governments are not subordinate to the central government. Like in India, we have state government. There is in states also there is a post for prime minister, cabinets, who takes care of various issues in the state level. And the third important step that was taken by the Belgium people is that the capital city has a separate government. It is totally separate. There is a central government, as I said, state governments, and there is a separate government of the central city, Brussels, where we have the equal respect for the Dutch and French. And the last important step which we have taken which Belgian people have taken in terms of power sharing is the community government. Community government is specially meant for whichever community living in particular area. They can take care of culture related, education related, any such issues and decisions on that particular matters related to their community. So when we look at these points, it is very clear that to avoid conflict and to have a peaceful life in Belgium, they have gone for power sharing. This is what one case I thought to take to prove that what is the relevance of power sharing. In spite of having conflict in the beginning, Belgian people avoided that conflict through form of power sharing in different way. So when you look at this diagram, you will understand how the power sharing is done in Belgium. This will give you a rough idea. There is a central government, there are various regions, and there are provinces. In each region, we have 5 provinces, and there are communes or cities, and a number is also given here. And this is how Belgium had gone for power sharing to avoid conflict, and that shows why should we have power sharing. Now let's take the second example. The second example is our neighboring country, Sri Lanka. Now, what are those ethnic groups in Sri Lanka? Number one, if you see the right side, the coastal area or the northern part of Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan Tamils, of course, from both Hindus and Muslims. And there is a southern side, there is a white circled part where the Indian Tamils mostly they live. They also, of course, will have Hindus and Muslims together. So Sri Lankan Tamils and Indian Tamils together constitute around 18% of Sri Lankan population. And the majority population is Sinhalese, 74%. And we also have 7% Christians. When you say Christians, they are from both Sinhalese and Tamil speaking people. So this is the ethnic composition of Sri Lanka. Diversity like Belgium. But what happened here is that in Sri Lanka, having many ethnic groups, but the majority community, Sinhalese, did not go for accommodation of all the sections. Like what happened in Belgium, Sri Lankan majority community did not go for accommodating all the sections. Instead, they adopted the policy called majoritarianism. So, such policy called majoritarianism led to civil war in Sri Lanka. Tamils formed a separate group called LTTE, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. So you can see the clear difference between Belgium and Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka did not go for power sharing. Instead, they had gone for a policy called majoritarianism, where majority community ruled through constitutional amendment according to their wish. So in Sri Lanka, continuous and persistent demand of the Tamils were totally neglected by the majority community. The demand to protect the language of the Tamils, the culture of the Tamils, the demand for equal political rights in Sri Lanka, demand for greater opportunities in government jobs, even to the respect of the Tamil language, Tamil culture, regional autonomy, wherever Tamils were living. And all these demands were not respected by the majority Sinhalese. Instead, what did they do? They tried to promote and protect one religion, that is majority religion, Buddhism. Instead of respecting Tamil culture, Tamil language, they started recognizing Sinhala as an official language. Instead of giving better opportunity even to the Tamils, Sinhala is preferred, and they have taken policies to prefer and to support Sinhala applicants for various government jobs and various university positions. So these type of policy called majoritarian policy in Sri Lanka by the majority community led to civil war, formation of LTTE, and this shows the lack of power sharing in Sri Lanka leading to conflict, where so many people from both the communities lost their lives. And of course, finally, the Sri Lankan government suppressed and eliminated the problem of LTTE in Sri Lanka. So, the analysis of case number one and case number two clearly helps us to know the importance of power sharing in democracy. Belgium, yes, there was conflict, but later they avoided conflict. They accommodated everyone. That is through power sharing. They have done the power sharing. Whereas when you take the Sri Lankan example, there was no such conflict actually. But slowly, gradually, it led to civil war due to the policy called majoritarianism because they have not done power sharing. So let's do an activity to sum up the entire case study of Sri Lanka where there was no power sharing. In one of the boxes, of course, we have written 9, that is Sri Lanka. Then comes, of course, number 1 group is Tamils. The second is number 6, that is Sinhala. So these two major communities constituted Sri Lanka. Then comes number 3, that is in 1956 constitutional amendment. They have taken the policy called number 4, majoritarianism. And majoritarianism policy finally leads to alienation of Tamils, demand for Elam, a separate autonomous province or area within Sri Lanka for the Tamils. And such demand leads to civil war, number 7. And finally, it was in 2009, that is number 8, the civil war was suppressed. And this is the entire case study of Sri Lanka. So, from these two analyses, a question arises in our mind why we need power sharing. So, how do we complete this activity? Where should we write power sharing? Where we should we write avoiding conflict? Where should we write spirit of democracy? So, why should we go for power sharing activity? Okay, in one of the boxes, we'll write power sharing. Then comes number 1, of course, why do we need power sharing? So that we can avoid conflict. We have proved with an example of Belgium. Whereas in Sri Lanka, we failed. That's why there was conflict and civil war. Another reason for power sharing, because in democracy, it is the spirit of democracy. Okay, it's a moral reason that in democracy, there should be power sharing amongst all the people, all the sections, to whatever extent, so that we can ensure safety, we can ensure security, we can ensure peace in the country. So these are the two reasons why we should have power sharing in any parts of the world, any system of government, especially in democracy. It is the spirit, it is the moral spirit that we should have power sharing. So, two reasons for power sharing. Number 1, to avoid conflict. Number 2, yes, it is the spirit of democracy. So, we should have power sharing in most of the democracies of the world. Now, coming to the next important aspect, that is how power is shared, or what are the forms of power sharing in most of the democracies of the world. When you look at this picture of America, for example, American system of governments there, we have three organs there: legislature, executive, judiciary. Legislature, it makes law, and there are two houses: House of Representatives and Senate. We have executive, which carries out laws, and there is a judiciary which evaluates laws. So, from this picture, what we understand is that power is shared among various organs of government, that is, legislature, executive, judiciary. We have in our country, in most of the democracies, we have this system of power sharing where the power is shared between three organs of government: legislature, executive, and judicial. This is one of the forms of power sharing. The second level of power sharing, if you check this picture, this diagram, There is a union government, state government, local self-government. Local self-government we have for the urban areas and also we have for the rural areas. This is what we have in our country. And many of the democracies do have this system of power sharing. So it's a vertical form of power sharing, top to bottom. And this form of power sharing we call as power shared between various levels of government. We also call it as a vertical form of power sharing. The third form of power sharing, look at these two pictures here. One is reservation policy we have in our country for various backward communities. On the right side, we have the reservation policy in the Lok Sabha. We have seats reserved for a scheduled caste, scheduled tribe out of 543 seats. And also, we studied in Belgium, there is a community government. So, wherever Dutch or French or German communities are living, they can take their own policy regarding culture and language. So, we have three examples: job reservation, reservation in the parliament of our country, and the Belgium example. So this is the third form of power sharing where the power is shared between various communities and social groups. So this example tells you how the power is shared between various social groups and various communities. So there is power lying amongst various communities and various social groups in most of the democracies of the world. Fourth form of power sharing. Check the pictures here. Indian, there are political parties. I have taken an example of America to three parties: a Democratic Party, Republican Party, and National Party. In India, we have so many parties. So, what is this form of power sharing I am referring here? Various political parties. So, power that is shared between various political parties in most of the democracies, we call it as power shared among various political parties. So, power is also shared among various political parties in modern democracies. Some are ruling party, some are opposition party. There can be coalition government. Through coalition government, also you can say that power is shared among various political parties at various levels. And this is one of the forms of power sharing. Power is shared among various political parties. So when you look at these pictures, there is a protest taking place led by the doctors, and there is a movement led by social activist Medha Patkar. Some of you heard about Narmada Bachao Andolan, NBA. This is a movement to protect the interest of those people who are being displaced due to the construction of Sardar Sarovar Dam, mainly Gujarat and Maharashtra, those regions. So you see here, doctors' movement or social activist movement put pressure on government. Various decisions of the government can be counter-checked by these movements, these hartals. So in most of the democracies, power is also enjoyed, power is also shared by these groups. So this is one of the forms of power sharing, and this is called the power is shared among pressure groups and movements. They do share the power, they do influence the governmental decision making process, various movements and various pressure groups. One more form of power sharing, I just want to brief you. By looking at this picture in our country, most of the countries of the world, we have these type of organizations. You can see Student Federation of India, we call it as SFI, the most prominent organization of the students in our country. We have Akhila Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, and there is also National Students Union of India. And all these organizations, Students Union, they have power. All these Students Union, they have power. They do influence decision making process of the government. They can force the government to change the decisions taken. So this is another form of power sharing. What is that form of power sharing I am referring here? The power is shared among pressure groups. Like earlier I said, doctors movement. So students movement also can put pressure on government. So power is shared among these groups. So let me conclude. In modern democracies, power can be shared in various forms. Power is shared between organs of government. Power is shared between levels of government. Power is shared between various political parties. Power is shared between various movements. Power is also shared between various pressure groups and various communities. So thank you for watching module number 1, power sharing, class 10th, democratic politics. By doing this, of course, by analyzing various aspects of power sharing, we understood why do we need power sharing, what are the forms of power sharing, spatial or social form of power sharing, and importance of power sharing in most of the democracies of the world. So thank you very much.